Hi chaps, and welcome to our next video lesson. Now we've completed the course, we are on out and out revision, and today's lesson is paper 1 revision, and as you can see from the title, it is going to be bones, muscles, joints and movements. Okay, similar to lessons we've had in the past, but a few more tasks for you to complete. It's going to be sort of 30 seconds, do a task, another 30 seconds, I'll then go through the answers, bit of explanation, and then we'll finish the revision process with some exam questions. There's quite a lot of exam questions. We won't go through them all, but they can be found in your paper 1 revision work booklets. So the new one that I sent you out at the start of the term. Okay, so let's get started on our first set of revision. Right chaps, let's get started with the first task then. On the screen is about to appear the bones of the body, or a skeleton for you to name. There are 16 bones that I want you to name. I know there's some crudely drawn arrows on there. Okay, let's go straight away. 2 minutes, off you go. I will put some hints on the screen after the first minute, but just work your way through the different bones of the body. So you've had 30 seconds so far. I'll start to put some hints on as we go. Up to 45 seconds now. Just starting to put some hints on the screen now. It's coming up to 1.5 minutes gone. Some hints on the screen, so the first letters of each of the bones. About 15 seconds just to wind it up. Okay, let's start working our way through the answers very quickly. I'm not going to write these in full, chaps. Okay, I'll just half write them. So you have got cranium, clavicle, humerus number 3, radius number 4, ulna number 5, femur number 6, 7 is the fibula. All right, make sure it says fibula, not fibia. Okay. 9, where are we? Is the sternum. Don't worry about number 8. We don't need to know about the mandible. Okay. 10 is our ribs. 11 should have pelvis. 12 is our scapula. 13 is our, where is number 13? Oh, sorry, is our talus. 14, patella. 15, tibia. And 16, it's not particularly obvious, is our vertebrae. Okay, so those are our 16 bones that we need to know. Just be clear in the shoulder, fellas. I've taught you clavicle and scapula. You only actually need to know the scapula for the syllabus, but it's good to know the difference between the two. Okay, so next task that we're just going to move on to. I say task, just very quickly take a look at this. Okay, so this is in your AO1 assessment packs in terms of what we need to know. So it's the connecting bones. They're all the bones we've just talked about, but those are the connecting bones in different areas of the body, just making sure that you fully understand that that is where the bones meet. All right, so where each of the bones meet in certain areas, those are the different ones. All right, but we've just talked through the majority of the bones that we need to know. Okay, so our next task with bones, the skeleton has 6 functions. What I want you to do, okay, is for the 6 functions of the skeleton, name them, and then can you also just put in some of the link words that we would associate with those functions. Don't need to write full sentences, but just write in the link words. Again, I'm going to give you 2 minutes maximum to do the task. Let's get ourselves going. As usual, I'll put some hints in after a minute. So just remember, key term plus the link word, something you might say to describe what it actually does. You've had about 30 seconds so far. Okay, I'll start putting some hints on the screen for you. So, M, S, P, M, S, B, I reckon. Actually, you might call them slightly different things to what I've put on the screen, but we shall see. Got about 30 seconds to go on this task. So remember, linking words as well as the key term. Right? The key term is obviously the important part, but you need to be able to link it to its actual function. What does it actually do? Okay, chaps, let's go for it then. So the first M for me, you might have these in a different order. It doesn't matter. Just make sure you mark them. So the first is movement. All right, and you should have your linking word in terms of joints. Anything to do with joints would be good. Okay. The next one is structural shape. And I'm just going to put POA, but points of attachment. So structural shape and points of attachment are in there. Okay, and that can be anything in terms of ligaments, tendons. It gives us our height. All right, some of you may have put there in terms of determining our height or something like that. It's perfectly fine. Right, but it just allows the body to attach to certain parts, so then we can produce movement and various other things like that. Number 3, this is probably the most obvious one we talk about in terms of protection. Okay, and you should have anything along the lines of different bones in the body that do protection of organs. Right, you might have had an example in there as well. Remember, it's predominantly flat bones that do the protection. Things like the ribs, things like the cranium are the ones that do the job for us. Okay, our next M is going to be mineral storage. Okay, as ever, we talk about bones there. Okay, so bones and calcium stored to help with strength and various other things there. Support is our next S. So support of bones, muscles, bones, muscle. Oh, bones and bones. I don't want to write bones and bones twice, do we? Okay, so bones, muscles, organs, anything along the lines that needs support. And then our final one is blood cell production. And I would hope along the lines of this, remember it's in the marrow of the bones, but we are looking at, I'm just going to put RB and white blood cells as well. Red blood cells, white blood cells, and our platelets and various other things that are needed for our blood. So those are our 6 functions of the skeleton. Okay, so remember, you need to know the bones and you need to know the functions that are within the skeleton. Okay, it's just basic AO1 stuff. We're not going into any depth at the moment, and it's that sort of topic that is AO1 and AO2 with examples. Okay, so if we move on to the next task, and you've probably guessed it, we move on from bones to the different muscles. So on your screen, chaps, there are 15 highlighted muscles. I want you to name them as best you can. Just pay attention to where the arrows and where the lines are actually going, because there's some that you might get a little bit confused on. They're very, very close to each other. Just keep an eye. I'll give you 2 minutes on this task again. I'll put some hints and tips on after the first minute if you are struggling. Okay? Off you go. Be especially careful of number 2, okay, because that's just on the inside of the shoulder, chaps. It's the one that we quite often get a little bit confused with. Number 1 is on the top of the shoulder. Number 2 is just inside the shoulder. And remember, take a look at the diagram. One of them's the front, one of them's the back if you're struggling with the muscles. Okay, so I'll start putting some hints on the screen again as usual. About 1:15 so far. Just 15 seconds just to finish it off. Hints are on the screen. I don't mind for a revision session if you're shorthanding them like I will when I go through the answers. Okay, but just remember you do need to write them in full for any exam questions or answers. Okay. Right, that's 2 minutes. Let's go through the answers. Again, I'll just shorthand them. I won't write them in full. So you should have your deltoids as number 1. Okay. Number 2 is our rotator cuff. Number 3 is our pectorals. I'll just put pecs, but pectorals. Number 4 goes across to the bicep. Number 5 is our abdominals. I'm just putting abs, but abdominals. Number 6, quads, quadriceps. Number 7, anterior. I'll just put anterior tibialis, or tibialis, however you want to say it. 8 is our trapezius or traps. Remember, it's just the triangular T. 10 is, where is number 10? Is our erector spinae. Okay. Number 11, you might have called it many different things. Okay, I'm just going to call it gluteals. Okay, but you might have put gluteus maximus. That is perfectly fine. Or glutes. 12 is our hamstring. I'm just going to put hams. 13, gastrocnemius. Remember, it's spelled gastrocnemius if you're going to spell it out in full. 14. Oh, hold on. Yeah, no. 14 is our latissimus dorsi. Okay. And I just realised I missed number 9 out. Sorry, that's tricep. 14, latissimus dorsi. And 15 goes over to our hip flexors. Okay, so those are the 15 that we now need to know. Hopefully you've done relatively well on them. If I just scroll across, okay, you can see there again on your, it's got 13 muscles here, but there are 2 that have been added since. Okay, so those are the ones that we must know. Now, when we go across from bones to muscles to movement, there are certain things we have got to think about as we go forwards in terms of how, first of all, the skeletal system works together with the muscular system to help movement be produced, which we'll talk about the different types of movement and how muscles work together in a moment. But there is also really, really important elements of what type of joints we need to know about. And we know they're called synovial joints, but we need to know the type of joints. So I'm going to circle on the screen what joints I very quickly want you to name. Okay, so this one here. So my first circle, I want you to name that. What type of joint is that one? And then at the elbow, that's number 2. What type of joint is that? Then at the hip is number 3. At the knee, number 4. And at the ankle/foot is number 5. Okay, so what joints are each of these? Really, really quickly. 30 seconds, just name the different types of joints we've got at the areas I've just circled. Okay, should just about be wrapping that up now. So hopefully, very simple task. Again, I won't write this out in full, but you should have ball and socket joint, hinge, ball and socket, hinge, hinge. Okay, remember the ankle is known for this course as a hinge joint. Okay, as well as knowing the different types of joints, we need to know the structure of a joint. So what a joint looks like, and be able to understand these different elements of a joint. So what I want you to do, I'm going to give you a minute or so for this one. You don't have to write these out in full, okay, but just tell me some key terms of the numbered parts of a joint that I'm just doing now. So you've got number 1 where it says articular cartilage. What is that job? Number 2, what's the job of a ligament? Number 3, what is the job of a tendon? Number 4, what is the job of the synovial lining? What is the job of the bursa? So that's number 4 there. Number 5 there. Where it says synovial cavity, I'm going to change that to synovial fluid. Sorry, I thought I'd already done that. Okay, so this one here is synovial fluid. Number 6. Okay, so you've got 6 different things we need to know about within the joint there. Cartilage, ligament, tendon, the joint capsule and synovial lining, the bursa, the synovial fluid. Those are the 6 things. Just write some key terms that you would associate with those different parts of the joint. Okay, we've had about 30 seconds. Another 30 seconds just to finish it off. What do they do? What is their job? They're basically safety mechanisms, okay? So if I scroll across, you can see I've got a tiny bit here in terms of where would you find the different joints, which we talked about earlier. Okay, and then you can just see within the different elements, so 7 parts. I only put 6 on there in terms of joint capsule. It's the same as we teamed it up with synovial membrane, really. Okay, so what do they do? Or the lining, which is the synovial membrane, you've got, should have the word secretes, okay? Doesn't produce synovial fluid. Remember, we've had many arguments in class about this. All right, it secretes the synovial fluid. It doesn't produce the synovial fluid. Synovial fluid, okay, is there to lubricate the joints and reduction of friction. Okay, bursa, similar thing, reduction of friction. Cartilage, exactly the same. It's also a shock absorber. You may have put shock absorber rather than preventing friction. Ligament, and this is key, difference between ligament and tendon, must have in there, attach bone to bone for a ligament, and they are there to stabilise the joint. They keep it together, they encapsulate the joint almost, whereas the tendon is on the end of a muscle and it attaches a muscle to bone. So that is the jobs of each of them. Okay. Right, so if we move down now to the types of movements that we associate with our muscles, okay, so we're not necessarily going to talk about the prime movers and agonists and antagonists at the moment. I'm going to let you work that out as we go through some exam questions. But on the screen, you have got various types of movements in this picture, okay? So what I want you to do very quickly, just 1 minute, can you name the different movements you can see in front of you? Pay attention to the arrows. Number 7 and 8 on your screen are to do with the ankle. Okay, so what is the ankle doing? Whereas 1 and 2 are relatively obvious in terms of what's going on. So 7 and 8 are all to do with the ankle movement. Okay. So 15 seconds to go. Number 6, obviously there's not a picture. I meant to mention that. Can you work out the one that's just missing? Very similar to number 5. Okay, let's go through the answers then. So number 1 is flexion, and you can see there's 2 versions of flexion on the screen. Right, so you've got flexion at the elbow joint there, where the arm is coming towards you. All right, so the shortening of a joint or the decreasing angle of a joint is flexion. And you can also see you've got exactly the same at the knee there. Number 2 is going to be extension. And again, that's the increasing angle of a joint, and you can see you've got it in the arm and the knee going the opposite direction. Number 3, okay, is our abduction. Okay, ab, not abduction. Okay, and remember it's important. That is movement away from the midline of the body. Okay, so if that's our midline on our screen, okay, it is movement outwards from that midline. Just remember, if someone is abducted, they are taken away, and that's how we remember that type of movement. Number 4 is then obviously the opposite, so that's adduction. Movement towards the midline of the body. Again, if I put a little line in there, and it's movement going inwards. Number 5 is rotation. All right, so that's that twisting movement that we have a lot of the time when we're moving round in that sort of direction, which means number 6, sorry there's not a picture for number 6, okay, is circumduction. And that's that full movement around the axis, so things like the cricket bowl or the swimming action, okay, is our circumduction. And then if we go to 7 and 8, if you look at the foot, I said it's to do with the ankle joint, which means we only need to know 2 different movements with the ankle hinge joint. All right, this one here, his foot is pointing. All right, we're going to say it's pointing. All right, so that's plantar flexion. I'll just put plantar, which means number 8 is going to be dorsiflexion. Okay, so remember, pointing is plantar. Okay, flat or risen up is dorsi. Okay, remember as well, all right, easy way to remember these types of movements. Okay, the hinge joint only allows flexion. I'm just going to put flex and extension. Okay, unless it's the ankle, and then it's only, if it's ankle, it's only plantar and dorsi. Right, that's because it is a hinge joint. If it is a ball and socket joint, it allows all these different types of movements. Okay, we don't talk about plantar and dorsiflexion with ball and socket joints, but ball and socket allows flexion, extension, rotation, circumduction, abduction, adduction. Okay, so ball and sockets allow all the types of joints. Hinge joints only flexion and extension, unless it's the ankle, and then it is plantar and dorsiflexion. Okay, so far we have done bones, functions of the skeleton, the different muscles, the different types of movements we associate with it. We've talked about antagonistic muscle action. We are now going to talk about the different muscle contractions. Okay, so first of all, what we're going to do, see what you remember in terms of our muscle contractions. I'm going to go down and I've got some pictures quite randomly organised for you here. All right, can you name the different muscle contractions you can see happening in these pictures? Okay, if I number them up again, okay, I'll just number them up. So the rugby scrum that you can see there, that will be number 1. The player doing a layup is number 2, and I'll just say that is a layup so you're not confused. There's movement going on there. Okay, this is a springboard dive, so not the holding movement you can see there. Okay, it's not even a springboard, it's just a board dive, but that is a dive happening, so not the handstand that he's completing. That will be number 3. This is a rope pull, number 4. That's running, number 5. And that is the crucifix in gymnastics, which will be number 6. Okay, so you've got a couple of different movements there to talk about. Remember, we are talking about muscle contractions. So if you are completing these movements, what are the contractions that are happening in the muscle? I'll talk about them if you can't remember them in a moment. Okay, but try and have a go at remembering what contractions are what. Okay, you've had 30 seconds so far. Okay, let's start talking about it then. So I'll go through the answers first, then I'll just scroll across and we'll talk about the different types of contractions just in case you are unsure. So the first contraction at the top there is an isometric contraction. Okay, so isometric, I'll just put isomet so I can just squeeze it in. Remember, there's isotonic contractions and there's isometric contractions. Okay, where their muscles are contracting but there's no movement actually taking place is isometric. Where the muscles are moving and there's movement that takes place, then that will be an isotonic. And remember, isotonic come in 2 forms. Okay, I was only talking about the main ones here at the moment. So if it's a layup, we don't really know what type of movement we're looking at there, all right, apart from his moving. So we know that that's going to be an isotonic. Okay, the springboard dive, exactly the same. The rope pull is our isometric. Running, we know there's movement that's going to be occurring, so that's going to be isotonic. And then the crucifix, the holding position, okay, there's no movement occurring, he's just holding it there. We know that is going to be isometric again. Okay, now remember, isometric contractions, there is no movement that takes place. Whereas isotonic, there is movement that takes place. Okay, so as part of that, in terms of isotonic contractions, you also have 2 different versions. So the shortening of a muscle is a concentric isotonic contraction, whereas the lengthening of the muscle is an isotonic eccentric contraction. Remember, the majority of movements you will see in your exam questions, and I'll go through a few of these and talk about these in a bit more detail when we hit the exam questions. If you're in any doubt, it is likely to be a concentric contraction. If you are in any doubt whatsoever, just choose concentric contraction. It is likely that it's going to be some form of movement, whether it's a throw, whether it's a kick, something along those lines. It is probably going to be a concentric contraction. In terms of an eccentric, so the lengthening of the muscle, remember we associate eccentric contractions with the muscles working as a brake or brakes. We quite often talk about things like squats. On the way down in a squat, as you're in the sort of the lowering phase, your muscles contract eccentrically before they contract concentrically. The lowering phase in terms of weightlifting of any sort of kind. When you're landing in a jump, you will be eccentric contracting first and then concentric. So remember, these sort of work in tandem, but it will be very, very clear in the pictures that we go through in a minute when we do a point A to point B type question, that what it's looking for. Okay, and just remember, if there's no movement, it is an isometric contraction. Okay. Right, let's do a couple of examples in terms of joints and movements again. So if I go back over here, I've got 4 pictures for you. Okay, before we get onto the exam questions, 4 pictures for you. I just want to talk about the joint movements again. We won't talk about the contraction. We'll do that in the exam questions in a minute. But on the screen, I'm about to circle some movements at the joints that I want you to have a look at. Okay, I want you to tell me what movement is occurring at each of these joints. Okay, so in picture 1, which is Jessica Ennis throwing the javelin there. Okay, I want you to tell me what movement is occurring, and I'll just call this 1A at 1A, and that is the elbow joint. Okay, the front of the arm. I then want you to tell me what movement is occurring at the knee joint. We'll call that 1B. What movement, it's a little bit ropey there, but we'll call it 1C, is happening at the knee joint there. And what movement is happening at the elbow joint there. Okay, call that 1D. Really, really quickly, 30 seconds. What movements have you got for Jessica Ennis there? Right, chaps, so hopefully you realise I only selected the hinge joints for these pictures, or for this first picture. So that gives you a 50-50 chance of getting this correct if you've used your brain, in the fact that you can only talk about flexion and extension, because I'm not talking about the ankle. So Jessica Ennis at 1A, that would be extension. It is clear, it is opening up. At 1B, that is also extension. At the knee, it's very, very straight. 1C, it's a little bit ropey. That is flexion. 1D, again, it's probably on its way in as she's about to throw. So we are going to say that is flexion also. Okay, let's do the same with Usain Bolt, please. A little bit more difficult this time. So I'm going to go for 1A, or we'll call it 2A with Usain Bolt. Okay, this is the ankle here. Okay, what movement is occurring at that point? I also want us to think about the hip joint here. Okay, so I keep saying 2B, what's happening at the hip joint, and then what is happening at the elbow joint for 2C. Okay, shouldn't take you long, another 30 seconds on that one. Okay, again, think about what joint it is before you then choose the movement. So 2A, we know it's a hinge joint. We know it's at the ankle. It can only be one of 2 movements, plantar flexion or dorsi. The foot is pointing. All right, so if it's pointing, we know it begins with P, so that's plantar. The hip, this isn't particularly obvious, okay, and it's a difficult one, but that is flexion at the hip. Okay, flexion, so the hip joint is not straight. Okay, the angle is decreasing, so that is going to be flexion at our hip, and then at the elbow there, not massively obvious again, but that is flexion. Not going to worry too much about this third picture I've put on here, because we've done enough of flexion and extension, but just remember here, the elbow joints, that would very much be extension and flexion. Last one, and pay attention to the pictures here. Okay, so I want us to have a look at The ankle joint here is going to be 3A. The shoulder joint here, okay, so I'll put a big circle around it, but the shoulder joint there is going to be 3B. And then the knee joint just there is going to be 3C. So knee joint, ankle joint, shoulder joint. Okay, pay attention on the shoulder joint. See if you can get this. 30 seconds again, off you go. Okay, so 3A isn't pointing, it is down flat. So we are going to say that that is dorsi. 3B, now the arm is out at the hip. Okay, at the shoulder. Okay, so that means that there is movement away from the midline of the body, which means that is going to be abduction. Okay, be impressed if you got that, 'cause it's not clear to see, but I told you to pay attention to it. And then at the knee, it's clearly a decreased angle. Okay, so we know that that is flexion at the knee. Okay, difficult one that. Right, hopefully you've managed to get it all correct. Okay, right, let's go down and do some exam questions. We will not do all the exam questions that I've got here for you. Now, all of these questions are in your paper 1 workbooks that were sent out at the start of lockdown, so you can have a go at any of these questions as you want. Okay, I would suggest you go through all of them, and then if you want to send me them all to mark, I will mark them. I'm just going to go through a few and highlight a few key questions that we need to talk about. So what I want you to do at this point, rather than me talking our way through every question, I'll tell you the question I want you to do, pause the video, answer the question, and then I'll go through the answer really, really briefly and you mark it. Okay, so we are going to do the first 2 questions. So explain flat bones, and using an example, explain how muscles and bones work together to produce movement. Okay, so those first 2 questions, pause the video now, attempt them, and then I'll go through the answers. Okay, chaps, so first question. Make sure we stick to good exam technique to start off with. All right, so we've got to make sure that we've highlighted everything that is key to this question for us. So first of all, we know we are talking about flat bones. As soon as we talk about flat bones, you should automatically be thinking, which flat bones do I know when it comes to protection, which is part of the question down here. Okay, but we've also got to look. There's some number words in there, so name 2 flat bones. We must make sure we name 2. Okay, and then using a sporting example of your choice. So there's our sporting example. Suggest how these bones provide protection during sport. So basically, all you need to do for this question is name 2 flat bones and say how or what they protect. So, using an example, we would start with the name of the bone. I'm going to go for our ribs. Okay, you could have gone for sternum as well. It doesn't matter, but our ribs to start off with. My example is going to be rugby tackle. Okay, but that would not be enough for you to answer the question fully. Okay, remember you're going to do this in full exam answers. But you need to say ribs is a flat bone. They provide protection during a rugby tackle. Okay, it reduces... scribble that out. So it reduces the impact to protect vital organs such as, okay, so pen's having a little bit of a mare. So protect organs, e.g., because you've said the ribs, lungs / heart. So it protects the lungs and heart from the impact of a rugby tackle. That's 2 marks. You could then have gone with, and I think it's an obvious one, cranium. That's one we use in class quite a lot. Protect brain. when heading in football? Okay, so again, it's that whole impact scenario. Those bones take the brunt of the impact, protect your cranium, protect your ribs. Vital organs are then protected. You've just got to make sure you're specific in what you're saying. Those are the two I would mainly go. If you've gone with sternum and the same thing, it's not a problem. Just make sure it has that sporting example in there, please. Okay, must have the sporting example in there, and must have naming of two flat bones. Okay, this next question. This is a difficult question. We've gone through this quite a while ago now, but it's just a sort of a method type question to understand. So basically it is a how does the skeleton and the muscles work together to produce movement, using an example. Okay, so it's key that we must have an example to talk about, right? But first of all, we need to explain what happens. So in terms of any movement, you must have in there that the skeleton has joints that allow movement. Okay, you could also then talk about different joints produce different movement. Different joints allow other movements. I'm not going to go into too much detail in terms of that because we can do that in our example in terms of our movements. Okay, I spelled movements wrong there, but it doesn't matter. So you then going to go on to the fact that muscles attach to bone. Okay, how do they attach to bone? Muscles attach via tendons. Okay, you are then going to say to produce movement, muscle contracts. And this pulls on the bone. Pulls on bone. And I'll just put it over here. Movement is produced. Okay, so that is a 4-mark answer. Sorry, it's a 4-mark question. That is not a 4-mark answer. Why is it not a 4-mark answer? Because I have not given an example. So to finish your question off, for example, bicep and tricep work together. You could put in one of my favourite words in terms of antagonistic muscle action. So this is known as antagonistic muscle action. Bicep is attached to the radius. Okay. Oh, S, not US there. Bicep is attached to the radius. It contracts. Pulls equals flexion. Okay, you would also obviously say in there, sorry I skipped it, that the tricep relaxes. Right, that contracts, pulls the bone, flexion occurs. So there's our example. Okay, it doesn't say using a sporting example. You could use a sporting example if you wanted to. It just says using an example. So I've used the bicep and the tricep. That is now a 4-mark answer. You can see I've talked about joints, talked about joints allowing different movement, talked about how muscles actually attach, we've talked about how muscles contract. Like I said in here, you could talk about antagonistic muscle action. So they always work in pairs, muscles always pull. And then you've just got to give an example. Okay, hopefully I've explained that well enough, and hopefully you managed to gain some marks from those answers. Right, we just scrolled down very, very quickly. Some questions I'm not going to go through, but 3 safety features of a shoulder joint. Remember, that's when you start talking about the different parts of a synovial joint. So shock absorption, reduction of friction, the fact that it's a capsule, you've got ligaments that keep it going. All right, and you can see other types of questions that we then start to look at. All right, in terms of explaining the different terms of flexion and extension, give examples. Those are the types of questions you're going to get around movement. All sort of 2 marks. You can see there's a 4-mark one there in terms of describing the movements and giving an example. They're all very, very similar. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of those right now because there is absolutely no need. What I am going to do is go through some of these questions with you. So we've got quite a few here. Now, these are typically your 3-mark questions when it comes to movement, and muscle contraction. Okay, now we talked about what the different muscle contractions were earlier. We didn't really talk hugely about the different muscles that are involved, but because these are basic movements, okay, I would hope that you'll be able to get the muscles as we go. So let's do those first two questions. All right, so you can see on your screen at the moment, complete table 1, identify the type of joint operating at the elbow. All right, so that's really, really important that we understand we are talking about the elbow and no other movement whatsoever. Okay, so type of joint at the elbow, the agonist that is causing the movement from position A to position B. Remember, in this type of question, that then means we are talking about this movement. Okay, what is causing that movement, and then the type of contraction that's occurring. So make sure when you go through this question and this second one, you highlight some key points. But have a go first. Type of joint, which muscle is producing the movement, and then the type of contraction for both of those. Okay, so pause right now and have a go. Okay, chaps, so let's go through the answers of this one. So, type of joint is asking at the elbow. We know the elbow, I can't fit it in there, so I'm just going to put it at the side here. Okay, we know the elbow is a hinge joint. Okay, we then need to think about the movement. Okay, so if you're unsure on the muscle, first of all, you've got to work out what type of movement is occurring. The movement at point B is extension. Okay, so hopefully that will then lead you into what the muscle is that is causing that movement, and that is the tricep. So the tricep causes extension at the elbow, and then the type of contraction, it is the shortening of the muscle, right, which means it is a concentric isotonic contraction. You can just put concentric contraction, that's fine. If you've only put isotonic, that's terrible, that looks terrible, I can't leave that like that. If you've only put isotonic, that does not get you the mark. Right, you must say whether it's a concentric or eccentric contraction. Okay, the next one. Complete the table, identify the main agonist and type of isotonic contraction. So it's already given you the contraction on this one. I hope you noticed that. The joint action that is happening at the hip during movements A to B. Okay, so we know again, we are focusing on this movement here. What are the movements? So you can see at the hip at the moment where it starts is flexed, which means at the joint action as it's called here, all right, rather than type of joint. So the joint action here goes from flexion to extension in this one. Okay, so the movement is extension. The agonist muscle, okay, so in any exam, okay, you've got to think about which one is doing what, all right. You can't, this is the one where you can't get up and decide to walk around and work out which muscle is contracting and which muscle isn't. Okay, you just got to think about it when you bend down, which muscle does the work in terms of the contraction. All right, and that'll be the hamstring. So when we're extending at the hip, okay, that is going to be your quadriceps that are working. Okay, and again, because it's going up, it's not working as a brake. All right, type of contraction is going to be a concentric contraction again. Okay, be really, really careful with these types of questions that you just keep an eye on what it's asking you. All right, you can see two very, very similar questions there. Okay, but some people get a little bit confused between where it says type of joint and joint action. Joint action is another term for movement, so type of movement, whereas type of joint is what type of joint is it. Okay, so keep an eye out for that. Right, so if we just move on to the next. Oh, hold on, I've just realised a deliberate mistake. See if you guys were screaming at the screen at me when I was actually getting it wrong. Joint action is extension there, but the muscle is not quadricep. I'm talking absolute nonsense. Okay, it's still a concentric contraction. Okay, but actually the muscle there is gluteals. Okay, so gluteals is what causes extension at the hip as we go forward. Sorry about that mistake, chaps. Okay, let's go down to the next set of questions. Got quite a few there. All right, we're just going to focus on these three. These will be the last three we do on the screen. So, as before, read the question, go through all three, pause the video at this point, attempt them, and then I'll go through the answers in a minute. So pause right now. Okay, so let's make sure we fully use our exam technique first of all. Joint action, remember, that just means type of movement. We then need to give the prime mover. We then already been told in this question that it's an isotonic contraction, so we've got a 50-50 choice of whether it is concentric or eccentric. So we have a look. The joint action, it goes from extension through to flexion. Okay, so we start with the joint action that is flexion. So we then know, okay, if it is flexion at the elbow, that is going to be our bicep. And then the type of contraction, shortening of the muscle, is a concentric contraction. Again, like I say, a lot of these questions are concentric. You could have an argument with someone about that being an eccentric contraction if you wanted to. No, I'm not going to have that argument today. All right, but you could argue that the body weight is on its way down, which means that the tricep has to contract eccentrically first to control the movement down. But we are going to go for the basic type movement for this one. Okay. Second question. Trampolinist during a seat drop. Identify the type of movement that takes place from position at the hip again, from position A to position B. Okay. And then the agonist. So what we've got to be careful of here, chaps, is it's giving you three pictures. We ultimately do not need to worry about this one whatsoever. Okay, it says from position A to position B, so we just have to worry about this picture in the middle. Okay, it's going from extension to flexion at the hip. Okay, so flexion at the hip there, very, very similar, and then hip flexors is what we're looking for. And then that last question, just get my highlighter back up. So we're looking at the knee from position A to position B. So this is the movement we're worried about. It's the only one we've got to think about here. What's the agonist muscle of that joint action? So work out the movement. Remember, joint action means movement, type of movement. So it's clearly going there from flexion to extension at the knee. I'm just going to put extent. And then our agonist muscle, when we extend out, okay, our agonist muscle is going to be our quads. Okay, so that's it for today's lesson, chaps. All right, hopefully you found that helpful. A revision of some of the very basic stuff of the course in terms of paper one. We'll go through some more of the more difficult stuff as the weeks progress now. Okay, as before, you must email me a copy of your work at the end. So I want to see the notes that you've made. I want to see the exam questions that you have taken part in. The key here, fellas, is you can see there are lots of questions on my screen here. All right, all these questions are from your workbooks. All right, so go through your workbooks and attempt these questions. It's going to be good revision for you. All right, make sure you attempt all of those questions, and I just want to see a copy of your notes and the questions that we've done in the lesson, as well as anything else you want to send me regarding this lesson. Okay, well done, chaps. Take care.